My name is Eleanor Vance, and I am 29 years old, living in the quiet, rain-kissed town of Maple Creek, Oregon. For most of my life, the mist that hung heavy in the air outside was nothing compared to the oppressive fog that settled inside our home, cast by the man who was supposed to be my father, Arthur Vance. He was a presence, not just a person, filling every corner of our lives with his demands, his unpredictable moods, and his chilling sense of entitlement. Our house, nestled amidst the towering firs, always felt less like a sanctuary and more like a carefully constructed cage. I was an only child, and from my earliest memories, my world revolved around navigating his shifting moods, trying to anticipate the next outburst, the next cruel remark. My mother, bless her gentle heart, was just as trapped, a perpetual shadow in her own home, her spirit slowly dimming under his relentless criticism. My uncle, my father's brother, also lived with us, a quiet man who had, over the years, become an extension of my father's will, a perpetual servant in his own brother's household. He was the one who bore the brunt of my father's rages when my mother and I managed to slip away, and seeing his resignation broke my heart anew each day. What was interesting about my life, you ask? Perhaps it was the intricate, silent dance I performed daily, a constant tightrope walk between obedience and rebellion, all while keeping a hidden part of myself fiercely alive. I loved to write, to create worlds where characters had agency, where justice wasn't just a fantasy. It was a secret passion, one I guarded closely because my father had often belittled any pursuit that didn't directly serve his interests. He'd mock my notebooks, call my stories frivolous, and once even threatened to throw my treasured pens into the wood chipper if I didn't stop wasting time. That's why I rarely had friends over for sleepovers. I couldn't risk anyone witnessing the truth of our home, couldn't bear the shame or the scrutiny. My distinctive quality, if I had one, was my quiet observation. I absorbed everything, every subtle shift in my father's tone, every flicker of fear in my mother's eyes, every sigh of my uncle's defeat. I learned to read the air, to predict the storm, and to move through life as invisibly as possible. But beneath that quiet exterior, a fire smoldered, a fierce, unwavering determination that had been lit the day I realized no one else was going to save us. I must have been around 12 when I first understood the depth of our predicament. I'd begged my mother to leave, tearfully pleading with her, describing the fear that gnawed at me daily. She would just shake her head, her eyes filled with a sadness that mirrored my own, whispering about money, about where we would go. I tried talking to school counselors, timidly hinting at the constant screaming, the emotional abuse, the way my father controlled every aspect of our lives, from what we watched on television to what my mother cooked for dinner. But because there was no physical abuse, no visible bruises, their doors remained shut. Without money, without a clear path to safety, we were stuck. That's when the problem truly solidified in my mind. This wasn't just about my suffering anymore. It was about stopping him. It was about freeing my mother, my uncle, and eventually myself. From the age of 16, this became my singular mission. I was profoundly unsatisfied with how things were, with the pervasive sense of dread that permeated our existence. My father, Arthur Vance, was more than just a strict parent. He was a black hole, sucking the joy and life out of everything around him. He complained constantly, his voice a low growl when things didn't go his way, escalating to full-blown roaring matches over the most trivial things, like a misplaced remote control that he himself had moved. He would belittle my mother for her cooking, for her choice of television shows, even for wanting to teach Sunday school, a small joy she held on to. He'd try to ban me from writing, telling me it was a waste of time, something foolish that wouldn't amount to anything. He even tried to dictate when my uncle could sleep, demanding tasks be done even in the dead of night. His public face was a charming mask, a dazzling smile for company, but the moment they left, the mask would fall, revealing the furious, petty man underneath. His flirting with women decades younger than him, despite their obvious discomfort, was excused as just being me, a phrase that curdled my stomach. He was a narcissist, a master manipulator, and as the years passed, his substance abuse only intensified these behaviors, turning him into an even more volatile and dangerous presence. He was the nemesis of our lives, a living, breathing storm cloud. My world was shaken not by a single event, but by a slow, creeping realization that the only way out was to build my own escape route. I couldn't wait for someone else to open the door. I had to pry it open myself, piece by agonizing piece. The threat was constant, a quiet hum beneath the surface of daily life, the threat of his next rage, his next threat to kick someone out, his next act of psychological warfare. My uncle's passing, just last year in 2023, was a profound blow, but it also solidified my resolve. He had been my father's servant for his entire life, and with his death, that role, with all its unspoken responsibilities and indignities, fell onto my shoulders. It was a terrifying prospect, but also, paradoxically, an opportunity. I knew, deep down, that this was my chance to gather the irrefutable evidence I needed. The problem was clear. How to expose a man who was so adept at charming the world, who could twist any truth to suit his narrative. How to free my mother and me from his control without risking everything. This new, horrifying proximity to my father, fulfilling my uncle's role, was the new situation that created both immense threat and a desperate, final opportunity. I had to solve this, not just for myself, but for the quiet, enduring spirit of my mother and in memory of my uncle, who had never known a moment's peace. From the age of 18, the invisible shackles of my home life began to manifest as real mental health struggles. The constant anxiety, the pervasive feeling of worthlessness that my father had carefully cultivated within me, it all came to a head. I started reaching out, cautiously at first, building a small, trusted network of friends who saw me, really saw me, beyond the shadow of my father. They introduced me to doctors, to therapists who helped me slowly, painstakingly, unravel the knots in my mind. They taught me to spot the errors in my thinking, to differentiate between what was truly me and what was the toxic byproduct of living with a narcissist. Bit by bit, with their quiet encouragement, I began to build my confidence, a fragile but persistent flame in the dark. I made several attempts to move out, to break free. Once, I saved up enough money from a part-time job to rent a tiny apartment in a neighboring town. I packed my meager belongings, heart pounding with a mixture of fear and exhilarating hope. But within weeks, my father's constant calls, his guilt trips about my mother needing me, a sudden unexpected expense, or a car breakdown that wiped out my savings, would drag me back. It felt like an invisible tether, always pulling me back to that house, that suffocating environment. Each failed attempt chipped away at my resolve, making the problem feel bigger, more insurmountable. It was during one of these periods, after returning home defeated, that I started to take what little control I did have. If I couldn't physically leave, I would arm myself for the inevitable battle. I began to gather evidence of his behavior, a silent, methodical campaign. I started with voice recordings, discreetly activating my phone's recorder during his explosive rants, his belittling comments, his nonsensical threats. My hands would tremble, my heart would pound so hard I thought he might hear it, but I persisted. I meticulously time and date-stamped every incident, sending quick, coded messages to my two best friends, knowing those digital footprints would prove invaluable. "Dad's at it again. Kitchen." 8:32 p.m., they would read, the true meaning hidden beneath the mundane words. As my courage grew, fueled by the desperation of my situation, I even managed to take videos of him using illegal substances, his eyes glazed, his movements jerky. It was terrifying, watching him through the lens of my phone, but I knew this kind of irrefutable proof was what I needed. I stored everything, every recording, every message, every video in a secure cloud drive, a digital vault that my father could never access. The problem was growing, becoming more complex with his increasing volatility, his substance abuse spiraling further out of control. It felt like I was gathering twigs to fight a roaring inferno, but I had to believe it would make a difference. My uncle's passing last year shifted the entire dynamic of the house. He had been my father's quiet shadow, his ever-present helper, his emotional punching bag. With him gone, that mantle, that thankless role fell squarely onto my shoulders. It was a cruel twist of fate, forcing me into closer proximity to the man I was trying to escape, the man I was secretly documenting. I became his de facto assistant, his driver, his errand runner, his confidant, or at least, the person he would rant to in the absence of anyone else. I hated every minute of it, the way he expected me to cater to his every whim, the way he treated me as an extension of himself, not a separate human being. But I swallowed my pride, I bit my tongue, and I played the role he asked of me. I smiled, I nodded, I agreed, all while my internal recorder was running, my fingers were typing, and my phone was surreptitiously capturing every damning detail. He never suspected a thing. He saw only the dutiful daughter, the compliant stand-in for his departed brother. He never believed I could be anything but under his thumb, and that belief, that arrogance, was his biggest blind spot. I pushed onward, fueled by the belief that things would ultimately get better, that this suffering was a necessary step towards freedom. The lowest point came swiftly and violently in January of this year. I was at a friend's barbecue, enjoying a rare moment of lightness, when my phone rang. It was my mother, her voice trembling, barely audible. He put a knife in the door, Eleanor. Your dog was barking, he was trying to sleep." My heart stopped. A knife, in her door, without any care for who was on the other side. My father in a fit of drug-fueled rage over the sound of my dog, our small, innocent terrier, had gone from verbal abuse to physical threat. The police were called. He was taken away, charged with criminal damage. For a brief, blissful moment, I thought it was over. I thought we were free. But the system, frustratingly, allowed him to return home. My mother was terrified, and I was consumed by a cold, quiet dread. He was back, and he was more dangerous than ever. The problem had not just grown. It had escalated to a point where our physical safety was directly threatened. It was no longer just about emotional manipulation. It was about knives indoors. About 3 weeks later, the air in the house was thick with unspoken fear. My father, emboldened by his return, was even more volatile. I had an argument with him, a petty disagreement that quickly spiraled into his usual threats and accusations. But this time, something clicked inside me. My own safety was certainly at risk. I looked at my dog, curled up beside me, and I knew I couldn't stay. I couldn't risk him. I couldn't risk myself. That night, I packed a small bag, grabbed my dog, and walked out of that house, leaving my mother behind with a look of desperate apology in my eyes. I didn't know where I was going, only that I had to go. I ended up couch surfing between my two best friends' houses, relying on their immense generosity and patience. I felt like a burden, like I had failed, leaving my mother in that dangerous situation, but I also knew I couldn't fight him from inside the cage. This was the lowest I had been, displaced, homeless, constantly worried about my mother's safety, haunted by the image of that knife in the door. Every night, lying on a borrowed couch, I questioned everything. Had I made things worse? Would my mother ever truly be safe? Had all my meticulous evidence gathering been for nothing if I couldn't even protect her or myself? The legal process seemed to drag on endlessly, a labyrinth of paperwork and appointments. My father's lawyer, smug and dismissive, made it clear they would fight tooth and nail. Doubt, cold and sharp, pierced through my newfound confidence. Maybe I wasn't strong enough. Maybe he was right and I was just a fool. All the years of silent planning, of enduring his abuse, felt like they were crumbling into dust. I felt truly alone, facing an impossible Goliath with only a slingshot made of recordings and time-stamped texts. The lowest point was the phone call from my mother, weeks after I'd left. She was trying to sound strong, but I could hear the fear in her voice as she recounted another one of his outbursts. "He's so angry you left, Eleanor. He says he'll find you. He says you'll regret it." And for a moment, just a moment, I believed him. All hope felt lost. The turning point came when a lawyer representing my mother in the criminal damage case contacted me. It was a lifeline thrown into the turbulent waters I was drowning in. She explained that because the incident involved my mother's door, and I had been present or involved in the events leading up to it, I could be listed as a victim as well. This opened the door, not only for my mother to finally have a voice, but for all of my meticulously gathered evidence to be taken into consideration. It was a glimmer of hope, a spark in the overwhelming darkness. The lawyer, a sharp, empathetic woman named Ms. Davies, was immediately struck by the sheer volume and damning nature of the recordings and videos I had amassed over the years. She saw the pattern, the abuse, the fear, and she believed me. With her guidance, I began the process of obtaining an order of protection against my father. It was a daunting legal battle, but Ms. Davies fought tirelessly on my behalf. I had to face him in preliminary hearings, his eyes burning with a mix of fury and confusion, unable to understand how his quiet, compliant daughter had suddenly become his accuser. There were moments of intense fear, walking into the courtroom, knowing he would be there. But each time, Ms. Davies reminded me of the strength of my evidence, the truth of my story. When the protection order was finally granted, it felt like a mountain had been lifted from my chest. Not only was he ordered to stay away from me, but the judge, recognizing the gravity of the situation and the history of abuse, made a crucial decision. I was granted exclusive use of the house, and most importantly, full care of my dog. That house, once his fortress of control, was now mine, a sanctuary that he was forbidden to approach. It was a monumental victory, a first taste of true liberation. But the biggest hurdle, the true confrontation, was still to come, the final hearing in April. This was where the full weight of the charges against him would be laid bare, where his fate would be decided. In the 2 months leading up to that hearing, while I was living at my best friend's house, I underwent a quiet transformation. I dyed my hair, a bold, vibrant shade of auburn that felt like a declaration of independence. I focused on my mental and physical health, lifting weights, running through the winding trails of Maple Creek, feeling my strength return, not just in my muscles, but in my spirit. I spent hours with Ms. Davies, rehearsing my testimony, ensuring every detail was clear, concise, and impactful. I picked out a professional, confident court look, a tailored suit that made me feel powerful, not vulnerable. I was no longer the shrinking girl who had hidden from her father. I was a woman, standing tall, ready to reclaim her life. The day of the hearing arrived, shrouded in a typical Oregon mist, but inside I felt a strange, unwavering calm. I walked into the courtroom, my heart a steady drumbeat against my ribs, and took my seat. My father had not seen me for 2 months, not since I had walked out on him. His eyes, when they finally found me, widened in disbelief. He saw my new hair, my confident posture, the way I met his gaze unafraid. He tried to speak to me, to call my name right there in the courtroom, but before he could utter a sound, the prosecutor, a formidable woman with a no-nonsense demeanor, stepped between us. "Mr. Vance, do not attempt to make contact with the victim," she stated, her voice clear and firm. She then moved me from my original seat, placing me further away, but she didn't realize he could still see me from his position. He continued to crane his neck, trying to look past her, his eyes desperate, searching for a crack in my resolve. It was exhilarating, a surge of pure vindication. The prosecutor, noticing his persistent attempts, leaned over to the judge and quietly reported his behavior. "Your Honor," she whispered, loud enough for me to hear, "he keeps trying to make eye contact with Ms. Vance. It gives me the heebie-jeebies." That was it. That was my legally blonde Elwood's moment, the quiet, understated victory that meant the world. He was still trying to control me, to intimidate me, even in the very place designed to strip him of his power, and everyone could see it. When it was finally my turn to speak, I walked to the stand, my legs steady, my back straight. I looked at my father, standing just a few feet away, his face a mixture of anger and bewilderment. My voice, though it trembled slightly at first, grew stronger with each word. I told my story, not with emotion, not with tears, but with facts, with the years of carefully collected evidence. I described the screaming matches, the belittling, the threats, the constant fear. I recounted the knife in the door, the illicit substances, the control he exerted over every aspect of our lives. I held his gaze the entire time, meeting his eyes, refusing to look away, refusing to let him break me. He stood there silent, his face paling as the truth of his actions, undeniable and irrefutable, echoed through the courtroom. The judge listened, her expression unreadable, occasionally nodding. When I finished, a profound silence filled the room. The judge then delivered her verdict. My father, facing the overwhelming evidence, had no defense. He was ordered to serve an extra week in jail for contempt of court due to his behavior towards me, a final, public humiliation. And then came the ultimate blow to his ego, the consequence that would truly shatter his world of control. He was mandated to attend a court-ordered rehabilitation program for the next 9 months. 9 months. 9 months of his life, dictated by others, confined, unable to control anything or anyone. The man who had sought to ban me from writing, my mother from teaching Sunday school, my uncle from sleeping, was now stripped of his own freedom. It was a poetic justice that fulfilled me in a way I hadn't dared to dream. The confrontation was over. The battle was won. Life in Maple Creek shifted, the oppressive fog within our home finally lifting to reveal the sun-drenched peace beneath. My father, Arthur Vance, was gone, confined to a rehab facility by court order, unable to exert his will over us, unable to belittle, to threaten, to control. As a human being, a part of me could hope for him to change, to truly reflect on the harm he had caused. But as his daughter, as someone who had endured his behavior for nearly 3 decades, I held very little faith that he would emerge from that facility a transformed man. And frankly, as a daughter, I did not miss him in my life at all. The absence of his volatile presence was a blessing I savored with every breath. I woke up every single day to a peaceful home, a space that was now truly ours, truly safe. My dog, who had once cowered under the table during my father's rages, now bounded happily through the rooms, his tail wagging a constant rhythm of joy. My mother, for the first time in her life, could finally look forward to coming home from work. The tension that had etched itself into her face for years began to soften, replaced by a quiet sense of relief, a burgeoning peace. She started teaching Sunday school again, her voice clear and joyful, unburdened by the fear of his critical gaze. The loose ends of our lives began to knit themselves back together, stronger and more vibrant than before. I continued my writing, no longer in secret, but openly filling notebooks with stories that reflected not the darkness of my past, but the promise of my future. I even started a small online community for aspiring writers in Maple Creek, a place where creativity could flourish, much like I was now blossoming. The house, once a symbol of his dominion, became a canvas for our new lives. We repainted the walls, rearranged furniture, each change a quiet declaration of our newfound freedom. One rainy afternoon, while helping my mother clear out some old boxes from the attic, boxes that had belonged to my uncle, I stumbled upon a worn, leather-bound journal tucked away at the bottom of a trunk. It was my uncle's handwriting, small and neat, filling page after page. I opened it, my heart aching with a mixture of curiosity and sadness. What I found inside was a revelation. It wasn't a diary of his daily tasks, but a secret chronicle of his life under my father's thumb. He had documented Arthur's abuses, his threats, his narcissistic rages, in precise, heartbreaking detail, mirroring my own hidden records. But beyond that, he had meticulously noted instances where he had subtly defied my father, small acts of quiet rebellion. A time he had intentionally forgotten to deliver a message from Arthur that would have hurt someone. A night he had stayed up late, pretending to be working, but actually just listening to music, savoring a moment of stolen peace. He wrote about his hope for my mother and me, his silent prayers for our escape. And then on the very last page, dated just weeks before his death, there was a short, almost illegible entry. "Eleanor, I know you see it. Don't give up. The truth always finds a way. I just wish I could have seen it too." A wave of emotion washed over me. My uncle, the quiet servant, had been a silent warrior all along, witnessing, enduring, and hoping. He had known. He had understood. And in his own way, he had supported my eventual fight, perhaps even laying some groundwork for it. It was a final, unexpected twist, a profound connection across time, a testament to the fact that even in the darkest corners, hope and quiet resistance can survive. It was a parting thrill, not of external drama, but of deep, internal understanding and validation. Not all revenge stories end peacefully, but this one did. It ended with peace, with safety, with a renewed sense of self and purpose. To those of you who are in homes like the one I came from, who feel that suffocating anxiety and crushing depression, but are still desperate for change, hear this. This is your sign to not give up. This is your undeniable sign to keep working, to keep gathering your strength, to fight for the life you deserve. It may take longer than you might wish. It will be incredibly difficult, and you will face moments of despair where you believe all is lost. But it is so incredibly worth it. I wish you all the peaceful and happy lives you deserve, lives where the mist finally lifts and the sun shines through.